Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special. I'm Fifi Peters. Now, very soon, the Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba is expected to deliver his maiden budget speech, where he will have to outline how he intends to direct government spending to boost economic growth, lower the country's debt, and of course, avert a triple downgrade from ratings agencies to junk status. For the next half hour, we will pick from some of the minds of South Africa's leading economists and ask them how best he should do this, how best he should deliver a spending plan that doesn't disappoint like the medium-term budget did last October. Joining me in studio today is Tumisho Grater, who is an economic strategist at Novare, Zweli Mabhoza, who is the founder of Priority Tax Solutions, Owen Khumalo, Senior Investment Consultant at Old Mutual Corporate Consultants, and Lesley O'Connell, who is VAT and Indirect Tax Partner at PwC South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Perhaps we begin with a reflection of what's currently happening now in South Africa. The politics is very charged right now. We already heard that the State of the Nation address was postponed. How confident is everyone at the table that the budget speech next week also won't be postponed? Zweli, perhaps if I begin with you.
Look, I was just listening to Paul Machatile. He was talking about a few minutes ago, and they've made it clear together with Jackson Tembu, who is the chief whip of the ANC in Parliament, that the budget speech is going to continue next week, and that is the plan. And in actual fact, it will be bad if that is changed, because everybody is geared towards what we want to see what is going to happen. Yes, I know that we need to have the State of the Nation before then, and they've promised that it is going to happen, and it is going to happen sometime this week, possibly on Friday, and then they are going to be debating it again on Monday, and then the president will be answering questions. The new president will be answering questions on Tuesday. So the expectation is that everything is still going to happen as planned. We're going to have the budget speech next week.
Next week, but are we not just rushing at things? I mean, Tumisho, would ratings agencies really, not give us a bit of respite until we, sort our matters out politically? Or will they come down harsh on us if we do postpone next week's budget?
Well, I think they've already given us quite a bit of respite, and waiting for Moody's now is going to be a key factor. I think an important thing to underscore here is that the budget process is actually a lengthy one. So this is not something that they're just rushing into in the last week to make sure that they present something. This is months and months of work. They need to put proposals in place. They need to look at certain economic indicators, talk about their budget. So that is something that's been in the pipework, so to speak, for quite a number of months. In terms of what the rating agencies would like to see, I think again, political stability, the fact that we did have this recall happening, and we do hope that President Jacob Zuma will then obviously honor what the ANC NEC has requested, have the State of the Nation address, and then table that budget. Of course, in that budget, there are certain things that we'd like to see. We need to see the fact that there are, their growth projections will be very important.
Before we get to what we'd like to see in the budget, months and months of work, so this budget hasn't been rushed, but months and months of work under a previous administration, if we are talking under the assumption that Cyril Ramaphosa is going to soon take the reins. Now, is it prudent to deliver this budget with a new leadership coming in, or are we pretty confident that the policy framework is not going to change that much under Cyril's rule?
Yeah, I think the rating agencies will be looking for policy consistency. So despite having a change in administration now, or we might even have a cabinet reshuffle probably post the budget, there's no time now to do that now, pre the budget presentation. But there shouldn't be any shift in terms of policy direction. If there is, then we're in serious trouble. The downgrades will definitely be fast-tracked. So nothing should really change. The work that is going into preparing what's going to be presented on Wednesday next week, that work is already done. So we just need the political processes and the parliamentary processes to be wrapped up in the next few days. so that that budget presentation can happen. But there's not much preparation that needs to be done at this stage in terms of input into that statement.
Okay, so you're pretty confident that a cabinet reshuffle will happen only after the budget. But will the credibility of the man who tells us about how we are going to grow the economy and direct spending matter? Or has the time period that Malusi Gigaba been finance minister so far, has he sort of redeemed himself and shown himself to be credible enough to deliver a budget?
I think that one always forgets that there's a whole lot of people and processes behind the minister. And these people and processes are working all the time, as we've all been saying here. So he presents it, and yes, he's presenting the views and the policies of the party. But I think it is a very consistent thing that he does. So I think it has to go ahead. I think there are requirements from a risk agent, the agencies. They want to know, Moody's and all of those want to know what is going on, and we need to show that everything is okay. Yeah.
But just to touch on the point you raised on a possible cabinet reshuffle, so it's not so much of confidence that it won't happen, but I think it's the process is, so with a vote of no confidence in Parliament, then cabinet will have to be dissolved. So there has to be some changes. I can't foresee a situation where the new president comes in and just inherits the old cabinet. So it's a perfect opportunity again to demonstrate that there is a new trajectory. There's a stronger focus on putting some impetus on some of those policy issues we need to demonstrate our commitment to, but without necessarily a wholesale change in policy direction.
Tumisho, I mean, can we dial back now to the October budget that, was very disappointing to most of the country's economists? I mean, to the ratings agencies even, they threatened further downgrades. I mean, what was it about that budget that was so terrible that Malusi Gigaba needs to make sure he averts this time around?
Yeah. I think that was certainly a wake-up call, and what we can appreciate about that budget is that it really gave us a clear lay of the land. This is where we are, no pretenses. I think a couple of issues there in terms of the fact that one of the fastest growing expenditure items is borrowing costs, or interest on both borrowing costs. So if now we're sitting in a situation where we are faced with further downgrades, this just means that we will have to pay more for our debt. Again, also the debt to GDP ratio, over 60%, that's very high. The fact that we don't have revenue or sufficient revenue coming in just widens that gap that we're sitting with. And again, we are still expected to meet this expenditure items. And then, of course, in December, we had President Jacob Zuma also now put a spanner in the works with higher education. So there were a lot of things already in that budget that were red flags. And I think coming now into next week, what we'd like to see is how exactly are we going to be funding all of these expenditure items, especially one of the two key ones that we're looking out for. One, of course, being the public wage sector bill, which is increasing, and that is likely to put more pressure again on the budget deficit, and of course the higher education and not borrowing the state-owned enterprises.
Higher education, a key factor there. In fact, the finance minister has actually released a statement asking for some tips on how we could possibly finance higher education. Zweli, from where you're sitting, I mean, how could Gigaba do this in such a manner that doesn't inflate South Africa's debt even further?
I don't think that we can avoid that unless they cut on other expenses. Because you were just asking the question before about what was disappointing about the medium-term budget speech. One of the things that was actually disappointing is that although the minister painted this picture about the things that are the shortcomings, he did not come with any solutions. And that was the biggest disappointment, to say, yes, it's fine to be frank and tell us what is wrong, but I think if you just leave it there, it becomes a problem. So I think that we need to have solutions here, because at that stage, I remember we did not know, there was a commission that was investigating about the possibility of this free education. We did not know the results, but everything was just coming out in the grapevine. And then the minister did not say anything about that, obviously because he was also in the dark. And the whole issue of how the nuclear was going to be funded, the nuclear energy option was going to be funded, it was also something that kept everybody in the dark. It's better now because I think the current president of the ANC, which is the deputy president now, has actually outlined that we're not going to do that if we do not have money, which is obvious because we don't have money right now. So I hope that things are going to change for the better. Even if there's a reshuffling of the cabinet, hopefully it's going to be for the better.
No, and perhaps your sentiments on that medium-term budget and what Malusi should do differently right now to especially avoid the hand of Moody's acting and following its counterparts in downgrading us to junk status.
I would echo exactly what my fellow panelists just said. We're looking for concrete plans in terms of how we're going to fund some of those initiatives. There's no doubt that the disappointment with the medium-term budget speech was that it did a very good job of outlining what the problems or highlighting what the problems were, but with very little detail on solutions. So that's what we'll be looking for. We'll be looking to see exactly how we're going to fund these initiatives, like free higher education, for example. But also how we're going to bring the deficit down. So it's not just the burden on the taxpayer, but the rating agencies will be looking for concrete plans on how we're going to address those issues going forward, regardless of which administration is in place.
Okay, concrete plans and implementable plans. Let's actually put a pause on things, take a quick break. We'll pick up with this pre-budget discussion in just a moment. Stay with us. Right, welcome back. We're picking up where we left off. The budget speech coming up soon, as next week, hopefully, and the Finance Minister is going to have to tell us exactly how he intends to navigate the very difficult path that South Africa's economy finds itself in amidst low economic growth and a ballooning debt bill. One of the things that Malusi Gigaba is going to have to outline is exactly how he intends to raise or find the 51 billion rand that South Africa needs to have in order to get the economy going again. And it's from this point that we're going to pick up off. You know, Lesley, everyone is now talking about the introduction of increasing, is it VAT? Right.
Yes.
How probable is it that he will do it now, especially as the ANC prepares for an election year?
If we look at the deficit, he needs to do something big to fill that hole. And plugging the hole with little bits of increases of PIT and the sugar tax and the fuel levy and excise duties is not quite going to give him that amount of money that he needs. So last year what they did was they introduced the tax on the wealthy, the 1.5 million, everybody who earns above that. And that brought in some money, but it's definitely not the amount of money that he needs this year. So they've really been delaying the increase in the VAT rate. It's not something that they've wanted to touch, especially because of the political ramifications, especially because VAT is going to hit the poor the hardest. And that's something that you obviously want to avoid. But I don't think he can avoid it anymore. I think he has to do it, because where's he going to get that big whack of money to plug this hole?
I mean, Owen, you're agreeing, and yet we do have an ANC that is essentially fighting for its life and fighting for its relevance as a party as the opposition gains on some of its weaknesses. Why would he increase the VAT rate now?
I think he's got no choice, because there aren't a lot more options for him, actually. So I think even with last year's budget, there was expectation that the VAT rate might actually be increased. We managed to avoid that, but I think this time around, the probability of it happening is actually higher than last year. So yeah, it could happen. It might be painful in the short term. But in the long term, I think we're going to ride it out as an economy. We need to close that deficit, and this is one way we can close it.
And I suppose it wouldn't be so bad to do so if you also create conditions whereby the economy is growing, whereby businesses are investing. I mean, people get paid more and then it's not so bad. So then how does Malusi Gigaba in his budget plan create such conditions whereby business can it said that business is on an investment strike right now, so whereby business can down tools on that strike and make an introduction of an increased VAT increase not so bad?
Look, there's an element of it that is not in his hands. One, if you look at the state of politics, that is one of the things that has actually scared the investors in the country. Because when people were looking in this instability that we have as a country, people were taking money out. So that is not in the hands of the minister. But now, given the fact that we've got this new regime that is going to come in, hopefully things are going to stabilize and then we're going to attract some investors. And I hope that even if there's an increase in any of the taxes, hopefully that is going to be something that is temporal, because one of the things that is also happening is that when you have a situation where there's a misuse of funds, in other words, the taxes that are collected, then that is not motivating to taxpayers to comply. And that is one of the biggest problems that we had. If you think about this 51 billion that we're talking about, previously, we had the tax rates that went up, and yet we had deficit in terms of collections. That does not make sense. What should have happened is that when you increase taxes, you expect that you're going to close the gap. But what is happening is because the economy, which is the cake that we're looking at, is not growing. There's nothing you can do. You can increase the taxes as much as you like. Yes, I do understand that now if you increase VAT, somehow you are also decreasing grants, in the sense that people, they don't only spend money on things that are zero rated, they also spend money on things that are actually vetable. In which case, if you've got a child that goes and buy bubble gum, that child will now be paying VAT on that at an increased rate. So basically whatever grant that has been given to that child is partially taken back. So I think that to have happy taxpayers, one needs to say, if we do something, let's make sure that it is temporal, and we deal with the problem of this expenditure that we cannot control. We've seen the reports that are coming from AG, where almost each and every department is getting a qualification. In fact, disclaimers. That cannot be right.
I mean, Tumisho, since the last budget in October, we have seen government make some moves on state-owned enterprises. We've got a new team there at SAA. We've got recently a new board there at Eskom. Is this enough to sort of neutralize the threat that state-owned entities have on a government's growing wage bill?
I'd like to just touch on 2 points, and I'd like to definitely come back to the state-owned enterprises. We've been talking about revenue, and I think one of the silver linings, really, if we think about it, is yes, the growth is still very weak, but we are in a better position than we were last year. So again, that will be a silver lining for us to get some revenue coming in from individuals. And if we actually are going to be seeing investors coming in and putting money in, this again should obviously lead to more taxes. But again, it's the management of the taxes that is still an issue. In terms of state-owned enterprises, I think the moves that we've seen, especially regarding Eskom, with new leadership in place, that has been positive. I think one of the key risks, if you look at Eskom, about 78% of its guarantees or its exposure is to Eskom. So your other SOEs, for example, like Denal or SA Express, only make up about 0.5. So, I think this is how we actually understand just how important the role of Eskom is and trying to manage that. I think the big thing is you don't want to create the view that this is a free bailout, because this could be setting a precedent for the other smaller SOEs to come in. So maybe not enough, but at least something is currently being done. The right signals are being sent in. Again, we're talking about the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa saying the nuclear bill is not going to happen, unaffordable. Malusi Gigaba saying to us that we're going to have to take some pain. So there are the right signals. So let's actually wait and see what's going to be tabled next week about where they're going to get this money from and how realistic some of these estimates are going to be.
Lesley, remind us again, with VAT, I mean, is it a 1% increase that we're looking for, and how much would that bring in?
1% brings in about 22 billion.
All right, 22 billion. So that's half of the 51 that we're looking for.
Yes.
Other than the increase in VAT, what are you expecting? What should consumers be looking out for specifically?
In respect of VAT or in respect
of other tax increases that could hurt them?
Well, definitely it's going to be your luxury goods, your cigarettes, your alcohol. Those are your easy wins that you're going to get, that every single year you know that the Minister of Finance is going to announce this in his budget. So it's definitely your beers, your whiskies, and all of those are going to cost more. But that is every year. Your fuel levy is going to increase. Your road accident fund levy is going to increase. So those are almost the quick wins, and they're an immediate response. So the money will flow in a lot quicker, that is the benefit of the VAT, is that it's immediate and the money flows in, and then that helps to pay the interest paid, charges and all of that has to be paid by government. So it's definitely something that is needed, in that it will give the quick win to be able to plug that hole very quickly. The other impact also that one has got to consider if you want to raise corporate income taxes is that you're going to be impacting foreign businesses who are not going to want to invest here. So increasing a VAT rate is not going to hit the foreign business who's going to invest here, because they'll be able to deduct it. It doesn't remain a cost for them. But if you're increasing your corporate income tax rate, it's going to make business a whole lot more expensive. So I think these are all the factors that he's got to take into account when he's sitting and finalizing his numbers and what exactly he's going to be doing.
No, for sure, and especially as the rest of the world is lowering corporate taxes and making it easier to do business there. From a savings and investment point of view, I mean, I imagine that the minister will touch on the tax-free savings accounts and how, how successful or not so successful, as I understand, it's been so far. But for savers and investors, what should they be looking out in the budget, or what should they be looking out for in the budget?
Well, if we could get further pronouncements on more tax incentives for tax-free savings, that would be great. The reality is that we, as a country, we don't save enough. So it's a challenge that we need to address. It's not even a short-term challenge we're facing, it's a long-term challenge. We've been in this situation for a number of decades. So we need to save. So the tax incentives that we've got so far have actually helped. People have actually been saving. So if we can get more tax breaks as the saving public, that will help. Yeah.
Tax breaks. I mean, one of the things, or the other things that the minister is looking for, is he's looking for suggestions on how better to direct government spending in a way that will help the current ruling party, the ANC, achieve its goals of inclusive economic growth. How should he do that?
Look, in terms of how one can cut expenditure, we need to deal with this irregular expenditure that is coming and fruitless and wasteful expenditure. I think that is the low-hanging fruit. You put the right people to manage all the entities and the departments within the government, then you cut all of that. That is the first thing. Once you do that, you build confidence. And then people, they become conscious that when they spend on things that they can account for. And that is going to improve even the quality of delivery, service delivery. The other thing that I hope that at some point it will not be politicized, but they will deal with it. South Africa is a small country. I don't think that it makes sense to have 3 spheres of government. That does not make sense. Because now, if you look at national level, you've got all the ministers that you have. They are replicated at provincial government. And you also have got local governments. So if you actually get rid of one of those, then that could actually come with huge savings. So for me, I think those are some of the things that I think the new dispensation or the new government should actually be looking at and say, now let's have these difficult discussions. In 1994, they wanted to have this compromise because the reason for that is because they wanted to accommodate National Party in the Western Cape and the IFP in KZN. Now that has come and gone. So we need to have tough discussions around this to say, do we still need 3 spheres of government? So for me, I think that we don't need that. But those are things that the ANC needs to engage on. Because you find that even from the opposition parties, some of them, they will really buy into that. So I think that for me, that is very, very crucial.
For sure. Tumisho, I see you nodding your head because
Yes.
I know you're concerned about the growing public wage bill. So I suppose for you, it goes without saying that we need a leaner government.
No, certainly. I think leaner, definitely better. Just to give you some ideas around where we're currently sitting. So we've got these wage negotiations that are currently taking place. The government has said or has tabled for a 7% increase. So they are looking for about inflation for their lower earners. earners and inflation -1 for their higher earners. But they, unfortunately, those discussions seem to be very, very difficult, and where the unions are saying, no, we're looking at anything from a region of about 10 to 12%. Now, currently, if we are looking for the 2018 year, our budget deficit would be around 3.9%. That was the projections from National Treasury. If we come in at around 10 to 12% and looking at the 12% more, we would be sitting at about 5% budget deficit. So, which is a lot higher than what we would be, if we were going to be keeping to about inflation related increases. So certainly that is a very big issue that we do need to tackle. And again, if we're talking about whether or not we're on this path of consolidation and whether rating agencies can look at us with some sense of, okay, they actually are doing something, I think these are just some of the suggestions that they could possibly be looking at.
If we can just have some closing comments from the panel around the table. I mean, that budget hopefully happening next week, Tuesday. I mean, if Malusi Gigaba was watching this and not busy with the politics that they're currently at play in his party, what would you like to say to him?
I think the time has come for a VAT rate increase, and he's got to find some way of helping the poor to alleviate the burden that they're going to be facing with the increased cost.
Owen?
Yeah. For me, the biggest issue is focus on economic growth. And I know we talk about it every time, and people talk about it all the time, but I think with each year's budget, there needs to be consistent focus on how we're going to grow this economy. Because we might think around the edges and say, well, okay, how do we increase taxes this year to fund the deficit for a year? But if we grow the cake, there's going to be a bigger tax base to collect from. But also, we're going to address the issue of unemployment, because then we create jobs. We've got a lot of our South African companies that have been success stories that are born at home, but have found the environment at home very difficult to grow and expand, and they've chosen to expand outside the borders of this country. We need to make it attractive for those companies to actually expand within the borders and stimulate economic growth and create jobs. And increase the revenue base. But governments, part in that, create that conducive environment in terms of policy consistency and incentives for business. And yeah, eventually, every year we chip on it and we focus on it, and eventually, over a number of years, we're going to get where we want to be. We can't be happy with economic growth of less than 1% per year.
Sure is. I want more cake. I love cake. I want to eat more cake. Really?
Okay. No, I think hopefully we'll get it. But I think what needs to happen is that the Minister of Finance, and I'm not just talking about Malusi, even from the previous ministers, you are not sure whether there's a buy-in from other ministers regarding whatever they actually deliver during the budget speech. We'll be talking about cost-cutting exercise, and then you find the ministers buying expensive property and expensive cars. So I think to some extent, the Minister of Finance needs to get a buy-in from his colleagues so that they can support him. Whatever initiative that is going to be talking about next week, we need to be happy and be sure that the other ministers, there is a buy-in to that. So if they are saying that they are cutting costs, someone must not be going around the country promising that we're going to do this and we're going to do that without thinking about what has been budgeted for. I think that would help.
Oh, for sure, certainly. Maybe even, wearing cheaper suits and not having a wife that loves to spend. But, Tumisho.
Yeah, again, I'm just going to echo their sentiments in terms of growth enhancing policies. I think one of the big things here is we do understand that we need to invest in education. So if we can ensure that things like the policies that you put in place are in line with the National Development Plan. So maybe look at doing a skills audit. What are the things that you say is going to make us more competitive with the rest of the world? These are things that are being tabled in the National Development Plan. So start looking at those things in order for us to actually grow the cake and be in a position to actually be competitive as a country.
For sure, and we didn't even get to touch on what the minister has to say and how in ensuring that South Africa doesn't get left behind in the fourth industrial revolution. Conversation for another time, perhaps it will leave it there. That is all from us here today. I'd like to thank my guests in studio, Tumisho Grater, who is the economic strategist at Novare, Zweli Mabhoza, founder of Priority Tax Solutions, Owen Khumalo, Senior Investment Consultant at Old Mutual Corporate Consultants, and Lesley O'Connell, who is VAT and Indirect Tax Partner at PwC South Africa. Next up, well, if you thought you were going to get the break from the politics currently at play in South Africa, you were wrong. President Jacob Zuma is currently giving an exclusive interview with the SABC. Will he announce his resignation? Well, you're going to have to wait until after the break. Stay watching. Bye for now.